Hey everyone, and welcome to this week's Tuesday Techniques with me, Jackie Blakemore of So Much More Fun. So if you're not familiar with these and this is your first time seeing it, then I'd recommend that you have a look over on the website and you'll see some examples of some of the past Tuesday techniques that we've done. The idea of these sessions is to give you some insight into ways that you can adjust your sewing patterns to suit your particular body shape and make those more comfortable and take advantage of that as part of your sewing process. So we've been going through these for the last sort of couple of months really, and we started out with things to do with the bodice. We've worked our way down and now we're kind of into making adjustments for trousers. And so last week we started that process. So if you haven't watched that one, I'd recommend going back and having a look. So we introduced some of the concepts of making adjustments to trouser patterns, what the anatomy of the trouser pattern was, things to look at in terms of your own personal body shape and how to get an understanding of what your own particular fit requirements might be. And just some general kind of hints and tips about how to take your measurements and that kind of thing. So this week, I want to just recap on some of the progress that I've made with my toile. So I said last time I was going to make my first toile for this part of the project. And I'm going to show you what I've done with that and some of the things that I will do differently next time. So I just want to talk about some of that learning really. I also want to talk about wearing ease. So somebody asked me in some of the feedback, thank you for all the lovely feedback, by the way, and the questions. One of the questions was about understanding how much ease to allow with your measurements. So I've got a slide just to show you with some details of that. And then I want to get into, how to make the full tummy adjustments on the front pattern piece. So we've got that as an example. So if you have any questions, if you're joining live, then that's great. I'd love to see you. And if you're just watching this in the replay and you've got any comments, then I do go back and read and respond to the comments. So please do kind of let me know if you've enjoyed the Tuesday technique session, or if you have any additional questions, or if there's any particular areas that I haven't covered that you'd like more information on. So a few topics have come out of some of my recent conversations with people. And so I probably, after we've done this set on the trousers, I'm going to go back and recap on some other areas. For example, sort of fitting around the neckline, possibly some things around fitting the armhole, that kind of thing. So if you have a particular area that you're struggling with or you want some more information, then be sure to drop me an email and let me know, or via the Facebook group, send me a comment, that kind of thing, direct message. So these sessions are typically around sort of half an hour, and so not too much of your time, just enough to dip in and allow you to sort of go at your own pace. So where should we start? Well, let's just start with a kind of recap on the pattern pieces actually. And I just want to show you about the wearing ease. So when we did the measurements last time, the measurements that we took, just to recap, were your waist measurement, and we want that at your sort of natural waist. And by natural waist, I mean not necessarily where your trousers are going to sit, but if you were to sort of bend from side to side, where that sort of hinge point is, usually it's just sort of around or just above your tummy button, that sort of area. And you want to take the measurement there. Your hip measurement, so that's important for getting the hip and being able to get your trousers on and off. We need to make that big enough. We also took what we called the crotch depth. So this is from your waist, if you're sitting on a chair, from your waist just down to where the chair is. So you want to sit on a kind of hard surface and just measure down like a straight line down the side seam. So this is kind of like a side seam measurement, and I'm going to show you sort of on the pattern as we come to make some of the adjustments why that's important. Then we've got the crotch length, which goes from the front of your in the middle, from the front of your waist right through your legs, between your legs, up around the back and to the back waist. And you want to try and gauge as well where the middle point of that is. Now, I'm still in query about that as well. So I've been checking on my trousers, and it's kind of where you want your inseam to sit on your trousers. So you don't want it too far back. You don't want it too far forward. You sort of want to gauge it by where the middle of your inside of your thigh is. And that's really where I think the sort of middle point of the crotch should be. So when you join the front to the back piece, where do you want that seam to sit? And then you also, as you're measuring that crotch length, you want to be able to check that you know what the difference is between the crotch front depth, which is from the front of the tummy button down to that join point, and then round. You also want to need to know what the back crotch length is. So you can either subtract that from the total measurement or you can measure that. So they're really useful measurements when we come to start doing some of these adjustments. And then you also want your thigh measurement. So, what around the top of your thigh, and again, measure in a couple of places. Measure your left and your right thigh, see if they're different. Sometimes if you favour one leg over the other, they might be different. And you want the sort of the larger of any of those measurements, really. So why am I recapping on that? Well, I wanted to just talk you through some of the wearing ease sort of recommendations, really. So this was something that came up. So for those of you that might not be familiar, ease is the difference between, or wearing ease is the difference between your body measurements and the fabric, the kind of finished garment measurement. And we always need a little bit, particularly in a woven garment, we always need a little bit of extra room. Otherwise, if you wore it, it would be skin tight and you wouldn't be able to move. So we have what's called wearing ease, which is kind of like the minimum difference you want from your own body measurements to the garment measurements. And so, and it varies depending on the part of the body and where it's located and that kind of thing. Then on top of that, you might have what's called design ease, which is depending on the style of the garment, there might be an increase in those measurements again. So if you imagine, the best kind of example I can think of is if you have a circle skirt that fits you on the waist, but then if you imagine it goes kind of quite out as a circle in terms of the design, then your actual hip measurement is going to be way, way smaller than the actual finished garment measurement. So whereas with a pencil skirt, you're going to have a much closer sort of collaboration between your measurement and the mini skirt, the pencil skirt measurement at the hip and the waist. So if you imagine, say your waist is 30 inches, you'd probably want to allow about an inch for the waist measurement. And so you'd want the finished garment to be probably at least 31 inches. If your hips are, say, 40 inches, then again, if you're making a pencil skirt, you might want maybe 2-3 inches of ease. If it's got a slight stretch to the fabric, you may want a little bit more depending on your levels of, how close you like your garments to fit. So if your body measurement is 40, then you might want it to be 43, 44 in the finished garment, and so on like that. So if you're not sure, then I would recommend getting something out of your wardrobe that you like the fit of, that you like the style of. Take your own body measurements and then measure the garment at those places and just see what the difference is. And that will give you some sense of what your preference is in terms of ease for the sort of styles that you like. So I'm just going to show you this slide. Just bring this up. So this is just to show you for trousers, as a minimum, this is the wearing ease. So for it to be at least reasonably comfortable, even just to get on and off, you want to allow a little bit of difference, as I say, between your body measurement and the actual measurements of the garment. So at the waist, that's going to be if you're at the smallest scale, the smaller sizes, then you probably want to allow 3/4 of an inch. If you're at the larger sizes, then you probably want to allow about an inch. So an inch is about 2.5 centimeters. And the reason it's different is because it's kind of a percentage of your size as well. So it will vary. If you get bigger, then you might want a bit more ease, just as a percentage of the overall size of the garment. If you think 1 centimeter in 10, if it's only 10 centimeters wide, 1 centimeter is quite a big jump. But if it's 50 centimeters wide, one centimeter is hardly anything, isn't it? So it does depend on how big the garment, the sort of garment is generally. So we want more, slightly more wearing ease at the hip. And this is because at the waist, not really much is happening. So yes, you might be jigging around and dancing, but it doesn't really need to move too much. And it can move, excuse me, with your body. Oh, sorry. Bit of fluff in my throat there. Whereas at the hip, you need to be able to move your legs. And so you want that to be able to move with your legs. So you're going to want a little bit more room. Also, we need to be able to stand up and sit down. And as we sit down, where our flesh is moves around a little bit. I don't know about you. I'm quite full around the lower portions. And so as I sit down, my bum spreads out a bit. I need a little bit of place for that to go. And so at the hip area, then you might want to have 2 to 2.5 inches of wearing ease. And if it's a looser style, so if you're going for more like the palazzo kind of pants or something like that, then it will be even more, it's going to be bigger than that, but that's going to be part of the design. But as a minimum, I'd be allowing sort of 2 to 2.5 inches. Okay, so on the crotch depth, this is this sort of measurement from the waist at the side, the measurement from the waist down to your kind of sitting bones, if you like. So that sort of length at the side. And here we're talking about, if you're wearing some trousers, how low down is the crotch going to sit between your legs? So you can see the kind of measurements here are fairly small. So, but it's also going to, you do want a bit of movement there, because obviously your legs are going to move as well. So I'd say, again, smaller sizes, about 1/2 inch, sort of mid-range of sizes, so kind of a 14 to 20, maybe a 3¼ inch, and then a 20 plus you might want to allow 1 inch there, just again, just for where the flesh is, and standing up and sitting down just sort of play a little bit of a part there. Now, your crotch length is that measurement, as we mentioned, from the front of your tummy button round all the way through your legs to the back. So this is kind of, and if you think about it, if you've ever had any trousers where as you sit down, I'm quite full in the bottom. So as I sit down, all the fabric kind of gets sucked away and I end up with it sitting quite low on my back. And so this is sort of to do with that measurement. And so you want to make sure that there's enough room. This would also kind of accommodate if you've got a bit of a tummy or if you've got a bit of fullness at the back. So crotch length wearing these, again, just allows for this sort of standing up and sitting down allocation, and also so as you're walking for your leg movement and that kind of thing. So that if you've ever worn tight jeans and gone to lift your leg up and it kind of shoots down at the back, or leggings, something like that, then that's probably because there isn't really enough length in the back crotch. And then thigh. So the thigh measurements, again, you're going to want to have sort of around about 2 inches of wearing ease, sort of around your thigh. And again, this is just for sort of movement. And I should say here, this is for woven garments. So if you've got something that's stretchy, like some jeggings or leggings or anything that's got some stretch in it, then generally with those kind of fabrics, you sort of want it either to be 0 ease, or you want it to have sometimes negative ease. So with things like lycra sportswear, that kind of thing, you sort of want it to be skin tight. I'm talking about sort of trousers here that are in either woven garments with a bit of stretch, a bit of elastane included, or, you know, sort of woven just like cotton or linen or something like that with no stretch. So just to get them on and off and for them to be comfortable. So hopefully that gives you some ideas about when you look at your own measurements and you're comparing it to the pattern will have some of this wearing ease built into it. So as you're taking the measurements, don't adjust the pattern so it's exactly your measurements unless it's a pattern for a stretch fabric. So you want to kind of add these bits on to just check that that's gonna allow for you to move and get them on and off. Okay, so I also wanted to show you, I did last time, we talked about this pattern. Let's get this out. So we looked at this pattern as one to start with because it was quite simple. I've not made it with quite such a flared leg, but you can adjust it, and I can talk about that as well a bit more. But you'll see from the technical drawing, it's quite straightforward. So it's just got some darts in the front and the back, and then it actually has, I think it's got a side zip. And for fitting purposes, this is quite useful because it's quite basic. So you can just try that without any complications of pockets or anything complicated like that. So you can at least get to a shape that you could reuse in a, you know, with any other pattern as you sort of as a check. So I did some work on that and I created a toile, and I just thought I would show you. So this is my kind of working garment. And it's been through a couple of iterations already, but I wanted to show you some of the things that I've done on here. So before I assembled the garment, I drew on some horizontal and vertical lines, parallel and kind of at right angles to the grain line, so that I could see when it was on if there were any areas where it was going out of balance. And then I've sewn those in a contrasting fabric so that I could wear it inside out or right side out, and I can see those lines depending on how I've got that on. So that's quite useful, and you mark these up before you start to assemble it. So as you've got your flat pattern piece cut out, then I just tend to do a couple of tailor's tacks where I've got my grain line. So you might see here I did a couple of tailor's tacks. That's probably not the best example. Yeah, so you might just see a bit of one there, down the grain line, so that I could then draw my line on afterwards, and then I can stitch that. So I stitched all of those first. And then I've assembled it with the side zip, but then I've also, because I don't want to put the zip in at this stage, so I've also sewn a line where the seam allowance is. So when I come to pin it on me, I can pin this side seam, and I know that I'm kind of lining it up where the seam should be. So again, just a useful marker there to be able to hold on to, because you can feel that with your fingers. And when you're pinning on yourself, it can be a bit of a challenge. So if you can feel that and just use that when you're pinning, then it's really helpful. I did also put the waistband on, mainly because it's part of this, in this case, excuse me, it's part of the sort of length of the bodice. So I think the waist, the actual waist marking is just really where the top of the waistband sits. So I wanted to know where that was and just try that out. So I've just kind of stitched that on there. So I've assembled the darts and I've put those in. I assembled the garment in full. It's actually way too long for my little legs, so I've turned it up at the bottom. I probably will just cut that off, I think. I did make an adjustment on the pattern to narrow the legs. And essentially what I did was I narrowed it on the inseam and the outseam, so I can show you that. I'll show you an example of that in a minute. Just because I don't want them this flared, and I wanted to kind of see that straight, see that hanging straight. So yeah, now I did also make some adjustments before I cut the toile out, which I just want to talk through as to why I would not do that again. So I think the first thing is that you need to have the pattern big enough that you can get it on and off, because you'll need to test it out. But I started to make some of the adjustments because I wasn't sure what order I was going to make them in. So this is where I would say I wanted to go through it in my own mind so that I could then talk to you about what worked and what didn't. So for me on this pattern, it was too long in the bodice, which is quite common. I'm quite small. I'm only 5'2", so it was quite long in the bodice. So what I did was, for that, I pinned on, I measured the seam allowance at the top because I needed to pin on the waistband. So this is the front yoke, as it's called. And I needed to know where that was so that I could see where the waistline was. So can you see I've traced this off, and this is where the waistline's marked on the pattern piece. So I wanted to know what that length was when I was doing my measurements. And so then I could measure this front, this is the front piece. So this front crotch length, and also the front crotch depth. And so when I measured the depth, from the waistband down to here, I found that it was going to be about quarter to half an inch too long. So I was doing some research, and it suggested that your crotch depth is not really going to change. It's sort of part of your body size, if you like. So if you imagine your skeleton structure, and so this kind of this section from your waist down to here, even if you put weight on, you don't tend to expand in this direction here. You might want more room, you might want more kind of ease between your legs if it gets longer, but you generally, from your height, it doesn't change massively. So that's something that once you kind of know what that is, then you can adjust your patterns for that. So I wanted to adjust that length first, because that would then give me the starting point. So I did that, and I just took out my quarter of an inch. So I've just literally folded out, I don't know if you can see that very well, a tiny little sliver here, just below where the dart finishes, because I didn't want to interfere with that. And I did that on the front and the back. So that's not to be confused with this length that goes kind of from the front and then under your legs. And so I also needed to measure that. And this is quite, so this was it looked fairly close actually in terms of the requirements. I think I needed to reduce it a small amount. I'm just checking what my length was. So my front length is 11.25, and the pattern looks like it should make up at 11.5. However, when I put it on, I think as I'm standing when I'm measuring myself is different to how I'm standing when I'm wearing it. And I think it was a bit long in that front. So I'll show you that in the pictures. The other change that I wanted to make, because I didn't think I'd be able to get them on, in all honesty, out of the packet, was that I needed to make some room for my ample rear. So I did an adjustment. So I shortened the crotch depth here, which is fine. And then I also wanted to lengthen this back crotch length. And so I'd seen about making the adjustment in 2 places. Now we are going to cover this in the next video, because this is kind of to do with having a full bottom as well, or a smaller bottom. You know, if you've got a flat bottom, then you want to make it in the other direction. But it suggested, I measured this length and mine was about 1.25 inches shorter than the pattern. So I thought, I'm just not going to be able to get those on. So I've made it wider, kind of lengthen the crotch here and then also here to split that measurement. So this allows for more to go between my legs, and this allows for more kind of around the curve of my bottom. And so they were the main adjustments. And then the final thing that I did was I folded in at the bottom. I just folded in the sides by the same amount. So you want to keep these even so that you keep it on grain. That's really important. So if you do try and take it in at the same distance on both sides. I did that on the front and the back. So I just thought I'd share those changes with you. I did make a couple of others that I will now reverse, I think, because I want to just understand a bit more about how the basic pattern was fitting, and my changes haven't been great. So I just thought I'd share a couple of my photos to show you. So if you'll just indulge me. Okay, so hopefully you can see that. So this is from the front. This is the pattern as it was kind of out of the packet really, and I've put some pins in at that center front really, because you can see that you can see that, but it's quite there's a bit of extra fabric there kind of across that center front. The other thing that I've done, yeah, you can see my mouse. Yeah, so you can see the lines. And so what you want is for these to be, when you're taking your photos, the horizontal lines to be horizontal and the vertical lines to be vertical. So I've got a little bit of a pull. I don't know whether you can see that, towards the outer thigh. So I might need some more width on this outer thigh here. And I've kind of got some excess fabric in this crotch area here. And I think this is to do with adjusting that crotch length. They're too long, and even though I've turned them up, I've still got some pooling around the knees, so that's something I'm going to deal with later. So that's the front, but overall not too bad. Fit across the waist. They were a little bit tight, as you can see, a little bit of tummy kind of peeking out over the top there. Too many cakes, that is. So this sort of emphasizes my poor posture. So I have a sway back, and you can see that. So my tummy kind of comes down at the front here, and then it's kind of level at the back. So this is sort of more comfortable for me in terms of if I was wearing the trousers. But you can see the balance line across the hip there is fairly straight. And I probably need to just shorten this front above that line. I probably just need to shorten that front crotch length. The side seam's not too bad. It is pulling a little bit towards the front, which suggests I need probably a bit more fabric on that front thigh piece. And that the thigh's kind of fairly level. I think, I'm not sure what's going on. I think I need to sort out the length before I can do that bottom section there. So then this is the back as it was out of the packet, and you'll see there's a slight dip on the rear balance line. So somehow I need to make some kind of adjustment to bring that up. And I think it's to do with the fact, if you notice, it's going quite into my bum there. So hungry bum, I think they call that. So it looks nice and flat. There's not many wrinkles, but it was quite tight. Let's put it that way. It's not super comfortable to wear. So I need to. So I did make an adjustment for that. So this is lengthening that kind of back crotch and allowing more in that back curve. You'll also see that the rear thigh lines are sort of pulling up towards that crotch area, and I've got some pull lines here as well, suggesting that there's not quite enough length going from the back towards the front in that crotch length. So all of this pulling here in this region, just like there's just not enough length there for my body. So I did try and make a couple of adjustments, and one of them was to add that length into the back crotch, and I think I've gone a little bit too far with the length. So now you can see it's gone quite baggy, but that is now a bit more level on the thigh. But I've not quite got that right. So these lines are still bowing, and I still need to do a bit more kind of around this inner thigh seam. And also I don't think that curve is still quite right. So my bottom hangs quite low, and I'll show you that in a second on the pattern in terms of what I think I'm going to do next. But the fit across the back is quite nice. I've got a bit, I did loosen off the side seams as well, which is why it's not pulling quite so much to the side. So I think I probably will add some more at the side. But overall, I'm quite happy with that sort of first pass at it, and I've got a bit more work to do. So, whoops. let's stop sharing that. Yeah, so on to today's topic, which is, and it doesn't take very long. I was just going to show you something whilst I on this pattern. Oh yeah, I'll just show you one thing on this pattern, which I just want to kind of emphasize. So when I was doing the back curve, I just want to show you this. Let me just change my camera. Okay, so this is the back of the pattern, the back pattern piece. I've just got it kind of flipped over. But what I wanted to show you here was when I kind of look at my body shape, if you've got a nice pert bum, then this curve will just kind of be nice and sort of rounded here. But for me, I've got probably a little bit more of a shelf here on my bottom. And I think what I need to do is modify this back curve a little bit to make this come out a bit flatter here. So I'm going to do some work on that in the next iteration. And changing this back curve is quite common. So if you find that you've got more flesh and you need a bit more space, and it might seem counterintuitive, you might think you would need to add more fabric, but actually what you want to do is create more of a gap in this area here for your body. And so taking this back curve out is one option for doing that. So in the second iteration, I did just sew this to see what that was like, and I think it needs a bit more work. But yeah, so I just wanted to kind of show you that. And this is obviously I've lengthened the back crotch here, so it could be that this combination now with this new length here, I can shorten this off here a little bit and still get that same length, and it will just move everything back and stop all that pooling under my bottom where my back thigh is. So I just wanted to share that with you. I hope that's okay. So now on to today's topic, which was to do the tummy adjustments. And so in this case, I've just got a little template here that we could use for making that adjustment. I'm just going to move my bits of paper out of the way. Right, so with this adjustment, what you want to do is, this is about kind of making an adjustment for if it pulls on your tummy. Let me just go back to my other camera for a second. So if when you put your trousers on, it sort of pulls a bit here and it's quite stretched out, and then it sort of hugs your tummy a little bit and you don't want it to do that, then this adjustment will give that extra space. And so what we need to do in this instance is, if your tummy's a bit rounder, if you imagine we do the same thing with boobs, we do a full bust adjustment, which adds both width and length to cover the extra flesh that we've got in that particular area. So we're going to do the same around the tummy. So we're going to add a bit more width across here so it doesn't pull, and then we're going to add a bit more length so that it doesn't pull up from underneath, or it doesn't pull down from the waistband, because you want a bit more fabric. If you imagine it's got a bit further to go, so you want a bit more fabric in that area. So that's what this adjustment is aimed at doing. So I'm just going to show you, you can do a smaller version, but I'm just going to show you it for a major version, and then you can work back from there really. Okay, so the first thing that we want to do is decide where we want our tummy adjustment. So if I was doing this for me, I would be measuring from my waist to see where the fullest part of my tummy is, and then I would measure down, excluding your seam allowance. I would measure down on my pattern piece to decide where I want to make this adjustment. So for ease on this one, I'm just going to do it just below the dart point. And generally that's probably going to be roughly where it's going to be, because the dart will take the shaping in to give you the difference between your hip and your waist. So it's likely that it's going to be in this area. You might find that you want to, if yours is higher, you might want to shorten the dart anyway, because if you want it to come out to a full point, then you might decide that you want to make your dart a bit shorter and you sort of bring it to a shorter point here. So again, there are other things to consider. So yes, I'm going to start just below my dart point, and I'm going to line my ruler up with my grain line so that I get a horizontal line. So I'm just going to draw a straight line across there. And what we want to do is we want to cut our pattern piece along this line, because we're going to create a sort of hinge, on this side. We're going to create a hinge here, because the side seam, if you've measured it and tried it on and your side seam seems to fit okay, then we don't really want to change this. We really just want to change this length at the crotch here to allow for that extra bit of tummy. So we're going to cut from the crotch seam out towards the side seam. And then we're just going to create a little hinge depending on how much you feel you want to add. So this might be a trial and error, and you probably don't want to add a huge amount, but you just want to make sure that you've got enough to cover. So I'm just reading some notes that I've got here to see if there's a maximum. So there's not really a maximum on my notes, but yeah, so you want to be able to measure. So, and I would probably start with probably 1/2 inch increments. Just see, a 1/2 inch is quite a lot actually. So if you've got quite a full tummy, then try that. The other thing that you can do is when you've got your toile on your original toile, you could just cut a slash across that area and then adjust until it kind of opens out, and it will at least tell you the length, the extra length that you need for the crotch to be comfortable. So that's another way that you can do it. So decide how much you want to add. So I'm just going to secure my bit of pattern onto my paper here. Turn this around. So yeah, so I'm just going to secure the bottom part so that I know that's not going to move about. I'm also, before I move this, I'm just going to extend with it kind of as it is. I'm just going to extend this line up, so I've got something to refer to as well. So when you're doing this, again, whenever you're going to cut your pattern, trace off the original so you've always got it, and then use your tracing for these adjustments. So yeah, so you could also check as well what extra width you want kind of across that area as well. So if you know that you need an extra inch or an extra sort of 2 inches, then you're going to put 1/2 of that difference here. So so as you can see, as I start to tilt this, we're going to get some extra length here, and then we're also going to get some extra width across the tummy. So that's going to give us our sort of extra to go around the body. So I'm just going to, so once you've decided how much you want to alter it by, so you'd measure this distance here, or you could measure this distance here. It's up to you, whatever works best for you. And then that's how much you're going to make the adjustment. So if I just secure that now in place, so just put that there like that. Then the last couple of things you want to do, so you'll notice there's a bit of a kink in here. So you're just going to want to smooth out this curve here. And you might be able to do that actually. This is fairly straight on this pattern, so I could just do that with a ruler. But again, if you've got a larger scale pattern, then you might just want to use your curve if you've got a French curve. And then the last thing that you want to do again is just blend at the top here. So we're just going to follow this. You sort of want this to still be kind of at right angles, because you don't want a big V in here, otherwise it's going to look a bit odd at the front seam. So you sort of want to blend this sort of at right angles here, and that's going to add the extra in. And we haven't really changed the length of the side seam, so we don't need to do anything on the back. If you had a facing, then you might want to make the same adjustment. So if you've got like a face, if this went up to didn't have a waistband and it had a facing on it, then what you could do is just trace off, mark down your sort of 2.5 inches, and draw a new line here for your facing pattern. And then you could just create your facing pattern. If you've got a dart in here, what you can do with this is you can just cut the dart and fold this in. So if I was to trace, let me just trace this off, do an example. If I can see this. So if I was creating my own facing pattern from this new piece, I would be tracing off my new shape with my new waistline. Let's say we've shortened our dart as well, so I'm just going to take that in there. Then we're just going to sort of create that shape. But what you can do when you're using a facing, you don't put darts in facings normally. We can fold those out. So, so if I was creating my pattern, I would cut this out. So that now fits, that would be my facing to go on here. So this is my sort of center front where it would go on the fold. But what I would do is I would fold out this dart so that I can cut my pattern, my facing pattern, as one piece. I would use a little bit of tape on that. Oh, got a big bit of tape. fold that over. And it's going to be slightly kind of jaggedy. So what you want to then do is just round off that bottom edge and just make that nice and neat. And then the same with the top. You would just do the same with that top curve there as well. But can you see then that will give you your facing pattern piece that will then fit with your top of your trousers. So yeah, just to kind of show you that as well. So your new pattern piece here, so you would have your top section. So unlike with some of the other ones we've done, oops, didn't stick that down. Okay. Yeah, so unlike some of the other ones we've done, this isn't a dart, this is just adding fabric. So you don't need to mark any darts here in this section here. These are just kind of adding the fabric in. The other thing that you would want to do is with your grain line, you still want the grain to be lined with the trouser part, so the sort of leg of the trouser. So you would redraw the top of your grain line here and not use that old one there. So yeah, and then we would just have our adjustments sort of around the side seam here. Oops, just to smooth off that little chink that's in this side. So you get a nice sort of smooth side seam. And you can see that's your new version of your pattern. So quite straightforward, an easy one to try and just see if that will help you with your fitting. So hopefully I've gone a bit longer today because I wanted to cover a few more little bits and pieces to recap. But hopefully that's given you some ideas of how to make the first part of the pattern adjustment. So next time we're going to spend a bit of time just looking really at this whole sort of crotch area, making the adjustments to accommodate a full bottom. So some of the things that you looked at in terms of being able to scoop out some different options, when you might add on at the side seam, when you might add on at the inseam, those kind of things. And just start to work our way down those sort of hip changes and that area. So great to see you, and thanks for being here, Mum. That's lovely to see you again. And hopefully you found that helpful. And if you've got any further questions, then like I say, you can always contact me on Facebook, direct message me, or you can email me at hello@somuchmorefun.co.uk. Thank you so much for all the fabulous comments. I do read them. I've had some great dialogue with you. I'm really enjoying kind of getting the feedback. It really helps me. I'm doing this so that I can share it with you guys. So yeah, thank you for doing that. I really appreciate it. So until next time, when we're looking at big bums or small bums, then I'll leave you with that. And I hope you have a great week. Bye for now.